it's cold. And if it's cold, a lot of times what I'll do is try to keep those batteries next to skin, or at least close to a heat source, right? And I know guys that use hand warmers and things like that if it's really cold out, to keep those things warm in your pack or keep them warm in your pocket. And usually I'll do that same thing. I'll throw a handful of batteries in my pocket and bury the other ones in my pack and wrap them in a down layer and things like that. And you kind of get what you get. But at the end of the day, I feel like if you can keep those batteries warm, they seem to perform a lot better.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. For those of you out there that are truck guys like me, I want to talk to you about one of our newest sponsors, Decked. If you don't know Decked, they make bomb-proof drawer systems to keep your gear organized and safely locked away in the back of your truck. Clothes, rifles, packs, kill kits can all get organized and at the ready so you don't get to your hunting spot and waste time trying to find stuff. We all know that guy. Don't be that guy. They also have a line of storage cases that fit perfectly in the drawers. We use them for organizing ammunition, knives, glassing equipment, extra clothing, and camping stuff. You can get a 2-drawer system for all dimensions of full-size truck beds, or a single drawer system that fits mid-size truck beds. And, maybe best of all, they're all made in the USA. So, get decked and get after it. Check them out at decked.com. Shipping is always free.
What animal in the world is most worth filming?
Man, I think that's a tough question. I feel like everybody probably has a different answer to that. I could probably give you a couple, but I don't know if I could give you one. My limited experience, I've had a blast, mostly because I like to chase them when I have a tag. But filming sheep hunts has been an absolute blast, and then I really love chasing mule deer, and so filming mule deer hunts has also been a blast for me. Yeah, those two are probably at the top for me as far as like North American stuff goes, which is primarily everything I've done. But yeah, if I had to narrow it down to two, I would do those two.
Yeah, those are good answers. And the best thing about that question is that there's not a wrong answer,
Right.
unless you would have said like llamas, in which case I just would have ended the interview politely and we would have both moved on with our lives.
I did have a little bit of a llama experience last year, and it was actually quite pleasant. I had a great time.
Oh man, you've been in Montana for too long if you're starting to say stuff like that in public. Well, why don't you introduce yourself and tell folks what your profession is?
Yeah, my name is Sam Averitt. I grew up not far from you there, actually, in Eastern Oregon. Grew up in Baker City. I was born in Idaho originally, and yeah, I work now, I guess, as a full-time photographer. It was kind of a work in progress for a long time. I worked for the Forest Service for a lot of years, not a lot. I shouldn't say that, but 6 years or 7 years for the Forest Service, and then kind of slowly made the transition to full-time doing the photo and video thing. And that's been the full-time gig here since like late 2018. So yeah, it's been a blast. To do a lot of work kind of in the outdoor and hunting space and things like that. I feel fortunate, I guess, to get to spend a lot of time outside and call it work.
What's the real difference, besides, the obvious part, between still photography and videography within this hunting and outdoor space?
That's a good question. I mean, for me, I think I have I guess getting into it originally, I was super interested in the still photography side of it. And I feel like when I'm doing that, I can really focus on trying to be creative in a way that maybe captures images that you don't see every day kind of in the outdoor space. And the video is different. I feel like I'm always torn video wise between trying to document things kind of as they happen and also shoot stuff that's visually appealing, right? So I think with still photography, you have a lot more leniency. You can kind of shoot things as they happen and you can create scenes in a way that I think is a little more forgiving than video. Video, a lot of times, things happen the way they happen, right? And especially when you're dealing with wild animals and you're trying to film hunts and things like that. Sometimes it happens the way you want it to, and sometimes it doesn't. And you don't necessarily get a second chance to kind of try to capture that thing raw the first time. And I guess that would be the biggest difference for me.
I'm a real pain to film, and it's because I don't fake anything. I don't do anything over again.
For
So,
sure.
the poor guys who have had to film me on hunts, they only get one crack at it. With still photography, I feel like there's there's some honesty and there's some imagination that goes on with that, because from the consumer standpoint, I get to see what's in the picture and I get to imagine everything that's around it. And there's a lot of honesty there. With videography, we get the illusion that we're getting to see the entire story,
Hmm.
and that's often not the case.
Hmm.
All this stuff, it ends up telling a story. And then there's the marketing side of the house where, yes, it's telling a story, but it's also trying to appeal to a customer and show them some new products or the way that those products are used. And this is just the reality of it. I think that consumers look at some of the personalities that show up frequently within this hunting and outdoor space, and they think, okay, that's the person who's influencing me. What they don't see is that there's a Sam Averitt behind the camera who's also editing, who is really putting together how that influence is actually occurring. And you're getting directions from whoever you're working with. But um, the honesty that you bring to a project, whether you're shooting a still photograph or a video that folks are going to watch on YouTube or wherever else, there's a big responsibility that you carry with that, to make sure that people are getting an honest look at the process, at the experience, at everything that's going into it.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. I think back to the beginning of that, I think you said that, you don't recreate anything and you don't do overs and stuff like that in film. And everybody that I've worked with, that's the same for us. I mean, I don't, which I think, and I think it's different. I guess I suppose there's a difference between making a film that involves hunting and then documenting a hunt, right? Um, those things are different, but I totally agree with you. And I think most honest way that you can portray it is the best way to portray it, especially in those docu style films where it's nothing elaborate, right? You're just kind of, as the camera guy, you're it's documentary style. You're following the hunter and you're doing what they do, and kind of whatever happens happens. And I think that does happen some in the space, and fortunately I've been lucky to work with people that have kind of the same take on that thing that you and I both do, it sounds like. And the way that it happens is kind of the way that it happens. And you don't often try to make it look like something that it wasn't, right? And I've always appreciated that about the people I've been lucky to work with. And it feels, to me, I really love hunting, and it feels disingenuous to me to tell a story that is inaccurate, if that makes sense, and to make something look like it wasn't, right? I mean, we've all hunted enough to know that things often don't go the way that you planned them. And when that happens, it sucks, but it's part of hunting. And I kind of think it's your job as well, it's your job as the camera guy, but also as the person that's ultimately putting that out, whether that's the content director of X brand or and things like that, to try to put something out tasteful and also honest, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And dude, that's why that's why I'm talking with you today, is because that's something that comes across in your work that I find huge value in, right? I know enough about hunting to be able to smell a rat, and I think a lot of people do too, right? Our our generation got lied to so much in every other form of media while we were growing up that we got really good at sniffing that stuff out. And
Mhm.
there's some vestiges of the old guard of media where it was very blatantly a lie, but it was kind of in a, charismatic, oh, it's television, we can do whatever we want kind of way. There's still some of that out there. And you see guys, standing up there, promoting products and saying that they'll trust their life to this air rifle and, just the most bogus stuff in the world, probably some llamas grazing in the background. And we're over that. We're really good at sniffing that out. And I think that part of the reason that your films have, or the films that you've shot have done so well is because it's a breath of fresh air. You're bringing that honesty to the table, and people really they associate with it really well. Is there a particular project that you're most proud of?
Yeah, that's tough. I appreciate what you said. And honestly, a lot of that, I think a lot of that kind of comes through in some of those films has a lot to do with not just me, but even the people that, like a lot of the people that I've worked for and worked with on a lot of those projects, because in a lot of instances, it's their vision, right? And you're kind of a hired gun in a way to try to align with that vision and make it look the way, capture it in the way that they envisioned in their head, right? When they decided they wanted to tell the story. So I think a lot of that comes back to the brands that I feel really lucky to have worked with and still work with. But man, a lot of the really fun projects that I've worked on, this is funny, but some of the things that I'm most proud of, I suppose, are things that never really even made it into. We were on a film and we were shooting a film, and for whatever reason, that it never went to production. Right? I think that can happen for a ton of different reasons. Mistakes that we made or I made or people made
Or just
along the
or just
way.
the company changes direction too. I've been
Totally.
I've been the part of film projects that one of them in particular, I spent 50 days in 1 year working on. We spent over $100,000 and they just didn't do anything with it. It's
Right.
like, wow, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. And it was good. We got good stuff. Worked so hard for it. And it's like,
Right.
no, change directions. We're not going to do that. I'm like, okay, that's cool. It's just 100 grand. Like, let it go.
Totally, man. And that stuff happens all the time. And it's kind of a bummer sometimes as the guy that shoots it to know that it just lives on a hard drive somewhere, right? And nobody's ever going to see it. But at the same time, there's not much that you can do about that. And it's kind of one of those things you just got to let go. But it is crazy, you'll shoot a whole project and it'll get delivered. And for whatever reason, maybe it
Yeah.
sucks or maybe they didn't like it or whatever, but it doesn't end up going anywhere. And that's
Yeah.
just kind of part of the game.
Yeah,
But
and maybe in 50 years these things will surface and it'll just be some dust on the bottle, like vintage hunting stuff.
right, right. That's a good point.
You never
Probably
know.
will.
You never know. I want to ask you some tactical questions for the folks in the audience, the home cooks out there that want to film, their hunt or their buddy's hunt, and whether they're doing it off their iPhone or a camcorder or whatever they've got. So on the species that you mentioned, like mule deer and sheep, those are animals that you're typically not going to be very close to when you're filming. And
Sure.
right now I've got lenses all over my desk, the biggest of which is a 600 millimeter lens. That still isn't going to do it on a sheep that's 400 yards away. It's just going to look like a slightly closer but still very far away sheep.
Right.
So how do you film stuff that's a long ways away and make it look crispy and nice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this probably isn't news to a ton of people, but man, the technology that everybody walks around with in their pocket now is incredible, compared to what was available even 10 years ago, right? So are the optics and the digiscoping kind of adapters that everybody has access to now. And so we use those things a ton at work. And honestly, you can shoot stuff on your iPhone through a spotting scope with a good adapter that it gets the job done, right? And we use footage like that a lot in some of these films that I've worked on. And sure, you can, in some cases you can tell that it's through a spotting scope, if that critter's out there a couple miles. But at the same time, I think most of the people that are kind of watching these films and taking in this stuff, they get it and they understand that that sheep or that elk or deer or whatever it is 2 miles away, and these guys filmed it through a spotting scope. I think they've all done the same thing. So man, I think having a good adapter and having an iPhone and like the best glass you can afford, it's going to beat spending $12,000 on a 500 millimeter f4 that weighs 8 pounds and you have to lug around in the mountains, right?
Totally.
Um, I think that's a great way to start and somewhat affordable too for kind of everybody out there that wants to film wildlife or hunting and things like that.
And another thing about it, and I've struggled with some videographers in the past, is they're so used to shooting and they're used to shooting with a red or something like that, where
Sure.
they've got this incredible image that they can develop, and they don't want to give up a megapixel anywhere along the way.
Right.
But what's nice about filming something through a spotting scope when it's a long ways off is it gives the audience the same experience that you have when you're hunting, looking through a spotting scope.
For
So
sure.
it's a little bit more of that first person perspective that I think lends some credibility.
Definitely.
Okay, another thing that can really quickly destroy a hunting film is wind noise in the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So a little bit of that once in a while, it's like, oh, it's windy. But if, every second or third shot, it's like, and somebody like trying to talk in the background and they're whispering like we're dating on Facebook and you can't hear them in the first place, that's terrible. It's terrible. So how do you defeat wind noise?
Yeah, that's a hard one too. And it's kind of one of those things that you always have to deal with, right? I think, the shotgun mics, everybody runs around and has a dead cat on that thing, and I do the same thing. And when the conditions are nice, that's great. But then too, we run a lot of like lab mics at times. So it's a bit situation dependent. We'll mic guys up with those too if it's bad out, and that'll help, especially if in a situation where you're archery hunting or something, or anytime you're in the woods, I guess people are trying to talk quietly, right? And so that lab mic tends to pick up what somebody's saying without grabbing so much background noise. And we use those quite a bit. And I think that's pretty helpful. But again, well, for one, there's a lot of people out there that are probably a lot better at that than I am. And I think again, it just kind of comes down to conditions, right? Get what you can get, and then if it's wicked windy, you might have a little bit of noise in there, but hopefully everybody that's kind of watching the film can understand the conditions.
There are some staple shots that show up in most hunting films that I'm a little bit fatigued by. When is it time to give up on stuff like, somebody's boots in slow motion crossing a creek, or somebody, lighting their jet boil in the tent? Like I've seen jet boils get lit in enough films at this stage that I'm like, got it. We're gonna heat up some water. All right. They are part of the experience and it makes cool noise when the flame comes on. How do you decide, okay, am I shooting a cliche or am I shooting something that people feel like needs to be part of this for it to even be considered a film?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. And honestly, that's something that I could, and probably everybody that is in the same line of work continuously struggles with. What do you shoot and what do you not shoot, and eventually what makes it into the film. Yeah, like you said, I totally agree. A lot of that stuff is cliche, and a lot of times when you're shooting it, it feels, at least to me, it feels cliche. I guess I always kind of default to if it's critical to the story or not, right? So if you have a good shot where somebody's hiking back to camp in the dark, they probably understand that you're going to go back to camp, make dinner, go to bed, do that thing. So maybe instead of trying to film them lighting the jet boil and making their dinner and sitting by the tent, something like that, shoot a time lapse or shoot something that maybe gives you a little bit more creative value where you can. I guess a lot of that stuff seems implied to me and probably to people that hunt a lot, right? So I'll usually try to, film some of that stuff just in case it becomes critical and you get to the editing bay and you realize that you need it. A lot of times it's not, right? So shoot a little bit of it or shoot whatever you think is necessary. And then I like to try to focus on different stuff, right? So like catching a time lapse with a tent or just with the stars, things like that, or something that's a little bit different. And time lapses too are one of those things that have been done a million times, but I still think there are fun ways to shoot those that are not exactly, the same way that everybody else has shot them.
And those time lapses have a lot of value, especially after a scene that has some suspense and you want to transition into, what's happening next, the next day, that afternoon, the next situation, and you can give your audience a little bit of a breather, and they can reset and they can relax, and then move on. And then you can build momentum into that next thing. I think time lapses are really nice for that,
Yep.
and they do look cool. They almost always look cool.
They do. And I think everybody appreciates sitting out, especially in like September. You get a nice warm evening and you're kind of sitting out of camp and it's 10 o'clock at night and you're making dinner and you're sitting there kind of just enjoying the star show. Or at least that's something that I still, after all these years, I still love it. I still like looking up and seeing the stars and wondering what's going on.
No, I love it too. Battery management, tricky thing. If you're going to be filming a lot, batteries are heavy. You have to decide between bringing lots of them, bringing a means to recharge them. I just today set up a Dark Energy Spectre 18 watt, like flexible folding panel thing. They can recharge my Dark Energy rechargeable batteries, and then I can recharge off those. So typically what I'll do is like recharge, my battery banks, and then at night I'll use those to recharge devices.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also not trying to run bigger batteries and bigger cameras and, going through multiples of them a day like you probably are. So what is your approach to battery management, and how does it change with weather?
I usually budget like a battery and a half a day for video stuff, and that gets heavy. An example
Dude,
up in
camera
Alaska.
guys carry weight, man. You guys carry weight. Yeah, there's a couple times I've reached over and grabbed a bag and been like, "Ooh, I need to take it easier on you." Like,
No, it does get heavy, and those batteries definitely add up. We did a shoot a couple years ago up in Alaska hunting Dall sheep, and it was going to be like up to 12 days in the field, right? So we did a couple of things, and one of them was we had one of those Goal Zero. It's almost like a big car battery, right? And I forget the model or the make, whatever it is, but you can plug your chargers right into that, and they do a pretty good job. So when we flew into the airstrip, we took one of those with us, and then we just kind of staged it there in the event that we needed to charge batteries. And then, I walked around for most of that hunt. You got like 18 batteries in your backpack, right? Which is kind of a pain, but but that's honestly the most sure way that I guess I've found to like make sure that you have the batteries. And then even doing that, you're kind of juggling when you're out there trying to keep track mentally of like, well, how many batteries have I gone through and how many do I have left? And you wind up filming things because there's a lot of time on those hunts, right? And it's daylight for so long. There's a lot of things you could film that probably wouldn't make it into the film at the end of the day. So I think recognizing what's important to the story and being able to shoot that stuff, and then also being able to let other stuff go and not shoot it and save batteries, which is honestly, it's a continual learning curve too for me. I always find in the first maybe 2 days of a hunt like that, I'm shooting way too much and you're burning through batteries and you're like, holy crap, how am I going to make it, the next 8 days with the batteries that I brought? But that's a learning experience. And then usually by day 3, 4, or 5, I'm kind of like, okay, you can kind of mellow out and kind of just shoot what you need to shoot. But too, it's tough if it's cold. And if it's cold, a lot of times what I'll do is try to keep those batteries next to skin or at least close to a heat source, right? And I know guys that use hand warmers and things like that if it's really cold out to keep those things warm in your pack or keep them warm in your pocket. And usually I'll do that same thing. I'll throw a handful of batteries in my pocket and bury the other ones in my pack and wrap them in a down layer and things like that. And you kind of get what you get. But at the end of the day, I feel like if you can keep those batteries warm, they seem to perform a lot better, at least for the Sonys and things like that I've always shot on.
Why are you Team Sony?
I used to be I'm still torn about this. I'm not I'm not convinced that anything is better nowadays, right? I've kind of resigned myself to the fact that it's like buying a pickup. Some guys like Ford, some guys like Chevys, whatever. They're all great trucks and they're all great cameras. I became a Sony guy, oh, maybe 4 years ago or something like that. And that was pretty much strictly because I started filming instead of just doing still photography stuff. When I was doing still photography stuff, I did shoot Nikon and I loved it. I had a D850 and an A10 and I love those things and they were huge and whatever, but I loved shooting them and they were ergonomic. They felt nice in the hand. And then when I started shooting more video stuff, it was kind of in that period where everything started to go mirrorless. I don't want to say I was forced to transition, but I felt like I felt like it made the most sense to change to Sony stuff just because the video capability was at the time better. And I haven't really kept up on Nikon stuff as well as I should have. It's probably all about equal now. Yeah, I did it kind of out of necessity when I started filming a lot.
Yeah, man, and I'm not a professional. For me, like just having the ability to navigate the settings and stuff, like that's huge. So as long as you can learn that, great.
Right.
And then the lens is so important. Kevin Harlander was talking about getting a different camera, and I was like, please just get a Sony full frame something. And he's like, well, I kind of want a Leica. It's like, bro, I've got all these lenses. Like, let's just get on the same page. And then, we're not gonna be jamming each other up. Like we can, use each other for lens rentals and just be so much happier. I do think that it's a Ford Chevy debate a lot of
Yeah.
times, and that they all do a really good job. I have a Sony A7 II, and when I got it, it was the bee's knees, man. Like it was the fastest kid on the track, and I just shot Matt Harding's brand new Sony Alpha, freaking whatever it is now, and I was lost, man. I can't navigate it. Like they move stuff around. It's got features I don't know, and they've all got goofy names. I'm like, damn it, I waited too long. Technology outran me.
Now you're stuck in the Stone Age back there with
I
Ace.
know.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, the technology moves so fast that I don't know. The new menu system I like a lot more than the old one, but I've kind of found a body that I like, and I just bought another one, and I'm like, I'm gonna stick with this for a little bit,
Yeah.
because it's not broken, and I'm sure next year they'll come out with a new one, but the changes are so minute. I feel like, man, you're almost better off just sticking with what you know and realizing that it's not necessarily the camera, right? They all shoot great stuff.
But besides brand, what are some features that people should look at if they're getting into, more of a professional grade or, a high amateur grade camera? You know, for me, I think that stabilization is big, right?
Hmm.
The range finding and the autofocus are both
Yep.
really important to me. What are some things that come up for you?
I get that question sometimes, from people that want to start shooting, or they kind of buy a kit camera, right? So, it comes with an 18 to 55 or a 55 to 300 or whatever that lens is, or maybe it's both of those. I think the quickest way to, in my opinion, kind of improve image quality and things like that from a gear standpoint is, instead of spending money on bodies necessarily, is to spend money on glass. Glass can make such a big difference kind of in the final product, right? That you're going to notice it. You're going to put on a new piece of glass. And I really do like to shoot primes as much as I can. I shoot a lot of 35 millimeter and 50 and 85 and things like that. I really like those lenses. And I think that and really, like, in the big scheme of things, they're not that expensive, compared to some of these zoom lenses, like the new 24 to 70 and things like that. Man, and if you don't want to spend that much money, you can find a cheap 50 millimeter. Everybody makes one, and almost all of them are pretty darn good. F2 or things like that, or even lower F1 and 1.4, and I think they're awesome. I think that's the from a gear standpoint, I think glass is just probably the most important, in my opinion, thing that can kind of change the quality of what you're putting out or change the look of it.
And I see the same thing bleeding into the other side of the lens, being the shooter. Man, if I had a client show up with a used Ruger American rifle and a Leupold Mark V on it, be like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna go kill something, you know.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
it was the other way around and it was some high dollar rifle that had a Tasco on it, I'd be like, what are you doing?
For sure.
But we're very visual people. If you were to take away one of my senses that would affect my life the most, it would for sure be my vision, right?
Hmm.
And it's not even that close of a race.
Right.
If we can use something to improve that, that is always going to show a massive, massive benefit. And I can even take this into archery for the archery only guys. You can show up with a cheap bow and a really nice, spot hog or whatever sight on it,
Hmm.
and I'm gonna be so pumped about that,
Yep.
right? Because your
Yep.
your visual interface is the most important thing.
Yep. Yep. I definitely agree. And I think those Ruger Americans are pretty darn good nowadays for for a
They are,
350.
dude. It's so amazing and
Right.
frustrating. And I kind of love getting to be alive during this time of rifles because I got to grow up during a time period where in the 90s, if you wanted a rifle that was going to shoot 1 inch, just one
Hmm.
inch, you needed to probably spend about $2,500 on it in 90s money. And then you had to reload.
Yep.
Okay. And today you can buy an injection molded plastic stock that looks like somebody picked it out of a machine with like the claw thing for a quarter, and they just slapped the cheapest metal that they possibly could in it, and you go down to the hardware store and you buy a box of factory ammo and go out to the range, and it's probably going to shoot pretty close to an inch,
Right.
for a three-shot group. It is amazing that we got to
Yeah.
live during both of those times. I love it so much. uh I do have some frustrations because I've got some of those guns that I spent a boatload of money on back in the day, and now they're getting beat by these cheap Savages and Rugers and stuff, but the used ones are free.
Right. Yeah, seriously. If you want something that you can just go start shooting. I mean, God, I think they're like 350 bucks or 400 bucks
Yeah,
down at the Ace Hardware. You can go buy one
yeah,
and you're good to go. Spend your money on an optic and that thing's gonna shoot.
yeah. Pretty incredible. Triggers.
Yeah.
I mean, you remember what like factory triggers were like in the 90s? It was a workout. It was all crunchy. Each of them had a personality. It felt like there was gravel rolling around in there.
Yeah, the times have definitely changed, man. That is for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny.
What's your bucket list hunt to film?
Honestly, I think the one of them that comes to mind is one that I probably shouldn't talk about too awful much, but it's a sheep hunt this year. It's I'll probably be a little bit vague here, which would be really annoying, but it's going on this fall actually, and it's a guy that I really respect kind of as a mentor and just as a good model for what somebody in the hunting industry might be like. And it's his dream hunt that he has pinched pennies and kind of made a reality over the years. It's going to be a sheep hunt, and it's something that he is super passionate about. And I just, man, I'm really looking forward to that. I think years ago when I got into it, I wanted to do stuff like that meant a lot to him. It'll mean a lot to him, right? And I'm excited about it because I know he's excited about it. I'm just really looking forward to that one. I think it's been a lot of years in the making for him, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think that'll be a blast. Yeah, that's a terribly vague answer, but I'll probably tell you more about it here this time next year, I think.
Okay. All right. We'll keep our eyes open. maybe we can do a follow-up.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. What's a situation you've been in that you felt like you were just absolutely struggling and not doing well, and what did you learn from it?
There's been a lot of them over the years. Do you mean, I guess, do you mean in the camera space, or do you mean just in a life space in general? What makes more sense to you there?
No, within the camera space.
Man, for me, I think I have many times kind of felt like I was out of my element. Just because I kind of moved into, I started in strictly the hunting space growing up. That was kind of like my childhood dream, and that's what I wanted to do. And kind of through hunting, I think fell in love with actually just photography and not necessarily around the hunting space. And so getting involved in more of the specific, I've been shooting for the last several years, and it might be lame to look at. I understand that. It's like more simple setup product photography. And that to me has been, and I'm still, still learning it. It's entirely been something I've had to try to teach myself and understand, because it's almost the opposite of what you're doing when you're out hunting, right? And so that to me has been difficult to learn and difficult to try to improve on. And man, the first year or two, I think doing it, didn't understand I didn't understand how to set a scene, how to make something look the way that the client needed it to look, right? Because I wasn't used to setting a scene. I wasn't used to producing something like that, or telling somebody to look this way or look that way, or move this thing just a couple inches over here. I was much more used to just shooting things naturally kind of as they happen. And so learning that has been great, and now I feel a lot better about it. But man, for me, the first year that I did that, I was like, I didn't grasp I did not grasp how to stage a scene in a way that would come across the way the client wanted it to, if that makes sense. So doing all that stage stuff was probably one of the biggest challenges that I kind of faced when I started doing just more of the simple product photography, if that makes sense, or lifestyle photography in that way.
Yeah. With those product shots, if I have the ability to manipulate light, I will fuss with that forever, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And when I set up my studio to do a product review or something like that, I've spent multiple days getting the light right before I start that stuff. I'm a huge nerd about audio because more than anything, I'm a podcaster, which is a
Right.
strange thing to say out loud, but it's an audio experience. But when I add that video element to it, I want that light to be so perfect. And when it is perfect, oh my gosh, it's amazing, right? It's
Yeah,
amazing when you get the light right.
for sure. And it is satisfying to see, man, I think in the first year that I did that, like so much of the shit that I shot just went unused, right? And you never saw it again. And I try to pay attention to that stuff, and I'm like, man, they never use this or they never use that. And so I was constantly, and I still am, I love feedback. I think I don't take any of that shit personally. I think it's business, right? And I would much rather have somebody that's dissatisfied with the product say, hey, I'm dissatisfied with this, and like here's why. Well, then right? I mean, like okay, so now I can fix it next time, instead of them ghosting you, or you never seeing it and them saying that it was great, and internally they didn't like it, right? For this reason or that reason. I think asking for feedback is like, I love it. And anytime somebody can give me feedback, I appreciate it. I do love it.
I'm the
But
same way. And it does feel personal, but it's not.
sure. Right.
And it feels personal because you're passionate about what you're doing and you're putting all of your effort into making it right. And when you do that and somebody says, you know what, this could have been better, it feels
Hmm.
like, oh, I wasn't good enough. But that's not it. That's not
Sure.
it. Whenever I ask people for feedback on something and they say that's great, looks good, I feel offended by that. I feel insulted that they don't care enough to tell me what could be better, because
Sure.
I can see room for improvement in anything,
Sure.
or that they don't have enough confidence in our relationship that they could feel comfortable giving me negative feedback.
Sure.
Which is another thing that's like, oh, well, I need to work on this. I need to improve this relationship so that they feel like they can tell me, this is where this needs to get better. When you've got buddies that are so confident that they can skip the compliment sandwich phase,
Right, right.
you're
Be
like,
like,
well,
hey,
your hair looks good today. Um,
right.
your finger
But
was
this
in
is
front of the lens.
this
Um,
is shit.
yeah, and
Yes, I definitely agree. I love it. I think, and having that relationship too, like you said, is so important. People don't want to hurt your feelings, and they don't want to whatever. They don't want to piss you off, and maybe some people do get pissed off about things like that. Then I think it's always a work in progress to try to realize that like it's business, right? It's not personal, and they don't not like you anymore, or maybe they don't even know you enough to like you, right? But if they can just give you constructive criticism that helps you improve in the long run, I find that super valuable.
yeah, and then on the other side of this, for the folks listening to this who might want to become more involved in the hunt industry, or they already are, there's lots of brands out there that are willing to give you product or pay you money just to be their cheerleader. I really advocate for avoiding those brands. Like,
Hmm.
ultimately that relationship is not going to work out. If they can take your respectful, constructive feedback, whether they use it or not has nothing to do with you. But if they'll at least listen to you and then provide the same back to you, then you can really develop a relationship with that brand and that company, and things are going to go very well. If they're just hiring you to be a cheerleader, ultimately that's not going to work out.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think that's always a fine line. It's a hard conversation too for people that I think for people that want to get into the space, doing, shooting things for a living, whether it's stills or video stuff. I think a lot of people, at least in the hunting space, do it because they love hunting first, right? Or at least for me, that was the case. And then you kind of maybe fall in love with the photo video side of things, and you want to work in the space so bad. And I've been there, and I definitely was there, that you do almost anything to get a job, right? Like you would, yep, I'll shoot whatever for like a jacket, or
Yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It's such a hard one. And people ask me that question. I struggle with it still, because I'm not going to sit here and say that I never shot stuff, when I was 20, for that I never shot stuff and traded it for product, or never, things like that. Cause I did.
Well,
I
I
think
wouldn't be
long
bringing it
term,
up if I didn't do it too. This
or,
isn't like, oh, this buddy of mine made this mistake. No,
sure,
I made this
sure.
mistake.
Right, right.
And I don't want you all to do it too.
Yeah. And same here, man. Such a difficult conversation because you want it so bad. And kind of to your point, I think if you get involved in a relationship like that, I think it can be hard for, that brand or that company, whatever it is, to, once you're in that space where you're willing to trade goods for assets, it's hard to break out of that, and it's hard to turn that into a paid relationship unless the shit you're putting out has changed drastically, which is kind of the point, right? Hopefully, if you're doing that, it's in the beginning and you're trying to grow and get better. But I think that can be a tough relationship to break into a profitable one, if that's where you have kind of concreted yourself into trading things.
Yeah.
But
I would rather have an introductory relationship where I was working for free than working for
sure,
than working for product. Because
sure,
you can transition out of that. But once a brand is seeing that you're willing to do the job for a jacket, then they're not going to pay you more than a jacket.
sure. Yep,
And it's a competitive space too. There's a bunch of guys coming up behind you that are willing to do the job for less. So you either
yep.
need to be able to do a substantially better job than them, or you're going to get run over.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I mean, I've had this conversation with a bunch of my friends that are kind of in the space, and we've gone back and forth on it. And it is hard, right? Because if you're a young guy and some brand hits you up about shooting something, for product, it's hard to say no, because that there's probably 4 or 5 more people behind you in line that are probably going to say yes. And then they're going to start to forge a relationship with that brand. And whether that's the relationship you wanted or not, who knows? But yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. I kind of always just tell people to do whatever they think is right, but don't. And it's hard too, especially for people that are creative, I feel like, to know how to value the things that they're putting out, right? Or to value their work.
Ask somebody else
Yeah,
for that.
right.
That's what I do. Like I
Hmm.
understand the portion of the role that I'm good at, but when it comes to trying to figure out how much an Instagram post is worth, like good grief, I don't know that, but I know
Sure.
the people that do, so I ask them. As you develop those relationships and make sure that they're mutually beneficial for that person that you're asking, because
Right.
they have valuable knowledge and they're providing it to you, so return that in kind. Man, that's where you can really start showing gains.
Yep.
And for folks listening right now, this is a more candid and honest conversation about what goes on behind the curtains than maybe you've ever heard before. Um, it's a little bit taboo to talk about this stuff, but
Sure.
I don't care. I think that
Sure.
it's really important that people understand what it looks like on both sides of the lens, what it looks like on both sides of the trigger.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. And in starting out, exactly like you said, man. I had so much help from so many people that were further along the journey than I was, that were gracious enough to answer my questions and kind of help me out and give me direction. And man, like without that, and I still have people like that, that are light years ahead of me where I'm at. And I think, man, not being afraid to like reach out and ask a question, and hopefully you have the relationship with that person. You guys can talk like that, and they're fine answering those questions. But I think it's so valuable because, man, how else would you know? For me, being a being an idiot kid, that grew up in Eastern Oregon and worked for the Forest Service, I didn't know anything about it. And fortunately, like I said, I had a couple great people that took me under my wing and or under their wing, and man, kind of steered me in the right direction, which I'm really grateful for.
And of course, my experience has been much the same, right? I just grew up
Sure.
on the other side of the same mountains that we both grew up looking at. Fought fire for the Forest Service going through college. Like we took a really similar path to end up in relatively similar fields. It's so fortunate, and it has been through a lot of trial and error and a lot of support from people who knew better than I did.
Sure.
Two remaining questions, sir.
Sure.
What is your favorite backcountry snack to put in your pack? Like if you're rummaging around in the lid of your pack and you see something in a crinkly wrapper, what gets you going?
That's a great question. Lately, I have been, this is probably in the last couple of years, it's not necessarily in a crinkly wrapper, I suppose, but I'm a huge fan of dates and peanut butter. I just think, I love it. It's so good. I'll eat at my house sometimes if I have some leftover from a hunt, right? Um,
They're a little bit like a Snickers.
yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. And
70,
calorically,
70%, 75.
yeah. And they're wicked calorically dense too. Like, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, yeah.
and some dates and peanut butter, and I love it. It's like a little peanut butter jelly sandwich, and it kind of feels like you're eating real food,
Yeah.
because you almost are. But yeah, dried dried dates and peanut butter, man. That's been my recent go-to.
Nice. That's so wholesome of you. Yeah.
It's not wholesome of me when I'm eating them at my house at 9 o'clock at night.
Uh, okay, last question. What advice would you give to your younger self if you could send 18-year-old Sam a text message, what would you put in it?
This is going to sound super cliche, probably, and a little bit lame, but man, don't give up on it. I think if you if there's something that you believe in, I grew up watching the Outdoor Channel, as I'm sure you did, and like, at that age, I wanted to film hunts for the Outdoor Channel, right? Because that was kind of the only thing that I saw. And kind of as the years went by, that was my dream job. It's what I really wanted to do. And as the years went by, I think my opinion on that kind of developed, when I started to see people shooting photos of hunting and in the hunting space and making a living doing it. I was like a mind-blowing moment for me. And I think just anybody that's in that position that's a kid and they want to start shooting and things like that, man, like get a camera that you can afford and that you're going to have with you all the time and shoot the shit out of that thing. Go shoot as much as you can and as often as possible, and you're going to get better. And that's and don't give up on it. I think, man, it might take years and years, but if you really want to do that and you really believe in it, man, don't give up. There's so much space left in the industry, I think, for people that are good at what they do, but also, I think the most important part of that equation is, I always tell people this, don't be an asshole. Like rule number one is for me is don't be an asshole and try to be an asset, right? And be somebody that people would like to take on a 12-day sheep hunt or a 10-day hunt somewhere, whatever it is, right? Be somebody that they would like to spend time in the woods with, and do your part and pull your weight and don't quit on it. Don't quit on yourself. I think, yeah, that's probably a little bit cliche, but I think it is true. And, or at least I felt like it was true for me, or at least for me, there's tons of times when you were like, this is a pipe dream, right? And I'll probably have to get a real job and be a real person. But I guess in the meantime, I'll keep trying and sometimes it works out, right? So yeah, I think anybody out there that wants to do it, sure, it's saturated, but you can do it. And yeah, don't quit on yourself. Don't give up on it.
Yeah, there's always room at the top.
For
And
sure. Yeah.
and it's 100% true, man. If you don't give up at anything, you just might make it.
Right.
If
Right.
if you do give up, you definitely won't.
Yep. Yep.
You
That's
know?
100% true, man. It's like my parents always used to tell me when I was a kid, man, it was like they always used to say the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And I think that proves true kind of over time. Yeah, if you don't quit on yourself and you keep trying to get better and you keep trying to improve and you try your best to do what you said you were going to do when you were going to do it, I think you'll get there. And I think that applies to all things, right? Not just photography or the hunting space or whatever it is, but it's probably a good life principle too, in a lot
Yeah,
of ways.
I think so.
But
Where can people follow your work?
um, man, yeah. Instagram, I don't post a whole lot on there, but I do put up some work occasionally. Um, and that's just my name, Sam Averitt at Instagram. And then I have a website too that's just samaveritt.com. And yeah, either of those places. And then probably see, and people maybe have seen stuff for Stone Glacier that I've shot, kind of like the hunting films like you're talking about, and other stuff like that. So that's kind of a good place to keep an eye on. And there's obviously a lot of other great guys that are shooting stuff for them too. But yeah, keeping an eye on those things would if you're interested would be probably the best chance to see something. I'm not as good about putting new stuff out there as I should be, but maybe I'll try to make a more concerted effort here the back half of the year.
Well, buddy, I think you're doing a great job. I
Well,
sincerely mean that. It shows in your work, and yeah, you are an asset. And
I appreciate
I
that, man.
appreciate you. Appreciate all the advice that you gave to the people who are interested in improving their own games. Coming from, such a skilled professional with the accomplishments that you've had, and I'm also confident that the best is yet to come for you, and I'm looking
Thanks,
forward
man.
to seeing what comes from that. And
I yeah,
yeah,
I really appreciate it, James. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, this is a blast, man. I really appreciate it. And hopefully that's not just all mumbo jumbo. Hopefully somebody maybe gets something out of that, but I appreciate it regardless.
somebody will. So thanks a lot, man.
Yep. Thank you, James.
Bye, everybody.
I just want to take a second and thank everyone who's written a review, who has sent mail, who's sent emails, who's sent messages. Your support is incredible. And I also love running into you at trade shows and events and just out on the hillside when we're hunting. I think that that's fantastic. I hope you guys keep adventuring as hard and as often as you can. Art for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatelain and was digitized by Celia Harlander. Original music was written and performed by Justin Hay, and the Six Ranch podcast is now produced by Six Ranch Media. Thank you all so much for your continued support of the show, and I look forward to next week when we can bring you a brand new episode.